Hi, guys. All right, Ashley, you'll have to let me know if we're officially live. Are we ready? Are we on Twitter? Is it happening? Okay, all right. All right, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. I'm excited to have this debate. This is a juicy, juicy debate, I think. We've heard a lot about BitVM. We did an entire panel on BitVM. And we've just now learned about sort of a potentially alternative, although I'd be curious if anyone has a different point of view about that, which is just soft forking Bitcoin and adding a new script so that we can potentially do even more trustless things with it. So really quickly, I just want to get everyone's introduction. Ekrem, we've already gotten your introduction, but Udi, let's start with you. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what Taproot Wizards is up to and how you're using OpCat? I know you're not using BitVM, so how are you using OpCat, or how will you be?
So I'm a customer support intern at Taproot Wizards. We are one of the earliest ordinals collections, and also we were very much obsessed with OpCat. One of the reasons is CatVM, which is it is really a way to build simple programmable interface on top of OpCat for Bitcoin. Another is what we call catnip, which is a token, a standard for tokens on Bitcoin L1 that are also programmable and swappable. Really though, and yeah, we also made the Quantum Cats collection on Ordinals, which is kind of a movement/army dedicated to promoting OpCat as an upgrade for Bitcoin. I think that let's start. I have some things to say about OpCat, but let me end my introduction, and I think other people should introduce
One quick
themselves too.
follow-up, just because you brought it up. Can you please just explain for folks, we just did all this education about OpCat. What do you exactly mean when you say CatVM? What is the difference between CatVM and BitVM?
I think CatVM and BitVM are both in ways inspired by man, I sadly forgot. Oh yes, Matt. It's a design called Matt, MATT, which allows for kind of computations and roll ups on Bitcoin. BitVM does it in BitVM implements a similar idea by kind of leveraging pre-signed transactions for a few of the kind of trickier areas. And CatVM basically says, well, if we have OpCat, then we don't even have to do that because OpCat can use covenants and make things a little simpler. But there's a lot in common, I would say, with both. I think the really cool thing about OpCat is that it removes the need for a lot of the trickier parts in engineering of all kinds of L2 systems and really all kinds of systems. So it just makes things simpler in that regard.
We spoke a lot in the BitVM panel about sort of the challenger response games, the costs associated, sort of just the data needs associated with the challenger response games associated with having an optimistic rollup with BitVM. Does CatVM potentially eliminate those challenger response games? Does it affect the optimistic nature of the rollup?
No, CatVM is optimistic as well. The parts that are made much simpler are really where it comes to how do you restrict the use of Bitcoins only in a way that is compliant with the optimistic design. Without OpCat, again, you've got to have some set of signers that pre-sign some transactions that have some, dynamic and mechanic in there. At least to some extent, they have to be pre-selected. Maybe they can be rotated over time. But with Cat, you just remove that part of the system. It's true for BitVM. So I think Cat improves BitVM in that way. It's also true to many other designs for L2s and even L1 designs for protocols on Bitcoin. It just removes. Bitcoin has this for many years has had this kind of semi-disease where people have to basically do pre-signed transactions for a ton of things. It
We
just
see this
because
on
Bitcoin
Lightning,
doesn't have the
like
expressivity to do things otherwise in simple ways. So there are a lot of like really clever smart hacks to achieve what we want or close to what we want by using pre-signed transactions, but it really complicates things, and it usually adds at least some degree of trust. So the nice thing about Cat is that it basically it removes that problem. It takes that problem off the table. We still have other problems. You know, like you guys talked about, optimistic rollups have their own challenges, and other types of rollups have their own challenges. But because Cat removes this kind of disease of pre-signed transaction, it just lets you do a lot of things without kind of cheating, and that just makes all those designs simpler. And I think that's, you know, of course, you know, we've heard StarkWare talk a lot about their ZK style designs that use OpCat, so it doesn't have to be optimistic. You can really go in there and do a lot more.
okay, so we're going to definitely circle back to the sort of question of how Cat maybe optimizes or makes BitVM better, right? Maybe complements it rather than as an alternative, which I think most people think. Really quickly, though, I want to get an introduction from Alexei, please. I know you're also an author of BitVM too. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you're building with Build on Bob and sort of how you're involved with BitVM?
Sure. So, hey, I'm Alexei. I'm one of the co-founders of Bob. So what we do with Bob is essentially, of course, utilizing BitVM, and ultimately, I think the most interesting part that BitVM enables in the near future is bridging, right? Bitcoin cannot do DeFi on L1. I have a very strong opinion on whether that is possible. I think we've seen the challenges also with assets other than Bitcoin, right? With runes and BRC20s, that you cannot really do a lot with them on chain. It's just not meant for that. And ultimately, we firmly believe that you have to bridge Bitcoin to other chains. And ideally, these chains should also have Bitcoin security. And what Bob has a quite unique design in this regard, because we're not just a Bitcoin L2, we're positioned in a way that we can connect to multiple chains, also Ethereum and other networks, to ultimately allow Bitcoiners to not only use Bitcoin, you know, trading it against stable coins, but actually use it to get exposure and like use it in other networks, but keep the liquidity securely concentrated in one hub and use that for distribution. Now, in the BitVM side, I've spent many years working on Bitcoin bridges, and of course also here, as many times we have to admit that, you know, I would have never come up with BitVM, but we've tried so many things, and like kudos to Robin for actually, you know, discovering that you can actually hack this thing through Bitcoin script and pre-signed transactions. And I actually got invited to ask Robin and Super Testnet smart questions on a Twitter space when BitVM came out, and I had no idea what it was. So I spent many hours going through the Telegram chat, got BitVM pilled after a few conversations. But the concern was that the initial version was still a bit clunky. It wasn't super clear how it will be used for bridging. And that got me very excited. And then I got the chance to work with Robin, and then we onboarded many researchers that then contributed to the design of BitVM 2, which essentially turned out to be the one that is being implemented by most teams that are working on BitVM. So it was kind of the initial push, and I think since then there's been many improvements on top optimizations. I mean, when this started, like the initial kind of, you know, prover, the verifier, sorry, was like 4 gigabytes in size, but now it's like a gigabyte. So there's been so many improvements since even that BitVM 2 design came out, by teams building on top, which I think, I mean, it makes me personally very happy, because what I love about the BitVM effort is similar to Lightning, that it's, yes, there's so many different competing teams working on it, but ultimately everybody's contributing back to this core development, because it's open source and the core system is non-profit in that sense. And that means that we can make a lot of progress even with so many competing teams at the same time.
I'll ask you a follow-up just because I think you're probably the person on stage who's sort of most in the weeds on BitVM, given the fact that you were a co-author of BitVM 2 with Robin. How are you feeling about OpCat? Do you think Build on Bob will sort of immediately use OpCat if it becomes available? Are you seeing OpCat as sort of an advancement of this technology or a competitor?
I mean, in spite of Woody here, and to make it spicy, I should actually, debate against OpCat. But I'll be frank, I never liked this BitVM versus OpCat debates because I just I don't understand it. Like we have this panel here, but I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to fight Woody on. Yes, we can debate whether OpCat introduces a security risk, but that kind of is getting boring. Like, we'll have to find out, and I personally think we'll need a fork.
Alexei. It's about the clickbait.
I know. Okay. So look, I mean, my personal take on this is we'll need a fork. Yes, BitVM works, and I generally firmly believe that if we want to add protocol upgrades to Bitcoin, we have to show demand. And right now, we're not quite there yet, and BitVM is the way to show that these things can work, and that people will build rollups, and that people will actually care about better designs than CBBTC and RapBTC, which work, but they're centralized. And then we will ultimately, long-term, we will want an upgrade to improve the designs that we have. Whether it's OpCat or something else, we shall see. I mean, there is a debate to be had about the technical merits, and I think there's progress on that, even though it's slow. I honestly also will say that, yes, like what basically the difference between OpCat and BitVM is very simple in the approach, right? We want to have a ZK verifier in Bitcoin. It's too big, and either we split it up and verify it optimistically, or we get an opcode that allows us to compress the verifier to plug it into a transaction. But that transaction will still be very big. It will be expensive to submit those proofs on chain and execute and like essentially do that continuously. And the design for these rollups is still, not that simple and unilateral. It's not that simple. And my take is that I firmly do believe, and I'm sure like StarkNet team will debate on this, but I do think that there will be a balance. Even with OpCat, I don't think that the majority of rollups will be full ZK rollups just because of the costs, and it'll be a mix of like ZK fraud proofs where you essentially can improve the fraud proof based design, but because we have seen that, and like Arbitrum, like Stephen Goldfarrell just made a very good post about it. Like Arbitrum was named to focus on this arbitration, but then they realized that the 99% of the cases, it works. People don't cheat. And in the few cases, yes, then they need to be able to prevent cheating. And especially on Bitcoin, like where the continuous submission of proofs is going to be very expensive and only large rollups will be able to afford it. And then, they have to actually accept this competitive disadvantage of higher fees. I honestly think that, there's a lot of synergy between the BitVM design and OpCat-based rollups, because ultimately it'll be something in the middle.
Really,
Woody's taking off his hat, getting ready to fight.
I was going to say, really quickly before we move on, I doubt anyone on this panel disagrees, but I want to just give everyone an opportunity. Does anyone disagree? Does anyone feel that we should not soft fork to OpCat and that we should, just stick with BitVM and keep Bitcoin the way it is?
I think it's I don't think it's the correct framing, right? And to Alexei's point, when I joined this panel, I don't think it was ever posited as a debate. I think OpCat and BitVM are two very different things. OpCat is a soft fork that adds a very small specific capability to Bitcoin. It is not, if OpCat was live tomorrow, it's not like we suddenly do not need BitVM or have some competing BitVM thing. OpCat is like very, very small, specific change to Bitcoin. BitVM can leverage it.
To be fair, though, you often do hear this, especially in sort of the promotion and advertising and sort of marketing of BitVM style bridges. You often hear, oh my gosh, look, we can get trust minimized without a change to Bitcoin, right? This is like the frequent.
But it is true, right? Trust minimized is a term that you can span very broadly. I mean, look, we have multi-sigs that call themselves trustless and trust minimized. BitVM is certainly better than anything else on the market, even without a fork. But yes, with a fork, with a new opcode, it gets much, much better. There is no point debating that. And like, it gets better if we get a fork. But I would still argue it is trust minimized.
Okay, so we're going to probably drop the this or that conversation, and we're going to move into some kind of like just broader questions about, challenges with OpCat, or, whether or not this is
I
when or
think
if
what
this
will
is
be
coming and
really
how.
I think what might be really interesting for the listeners, though, with regards to OpCat, is that um, it is supercharging BitVM. It is supercharging StarkNet's efforts with ZK. It is supercharging Lightning. It makes Lightning way better, solves a bunch of problems people have there. It is fixing problems that people have with token standards on L1. The nice thing about you're gonna have a lot of the Lightning teams. Are most of them are not very happy about the trading of L1 assets on Bitcoin and runes and BRC20s. They think that they're shit. That's fine. The nice thing about OpCat is that it helps all of those teams, even when sometimes they're competing in opposing teams. Um, it's really, you'll be very hard pressed to find someone who's building on Bitcoin and will be telling you, "Oh, I don't want OpCat. It's bad. It's bad for what I'm building." That is something it will be very difficult to find.
We'll definitely circle back and talk about sort of the benefits to OpCat and other use cases besides sort of traditional bridging. Ekrem, really quickly. Oh, I remember it from Citrea. Do you want to quickly talk about how Citrea is using BitVM and whether or not you will also be integrating OpCat and your excitement about that?
I was just gonna add that, like, I think yes, we all agree OpCat improves BitVM, and I feel like with OpCat, we won't need this like 1 gigabyte verifier script because OpCat based ZK verifiers are much better. But I agree with Alexei as well. Like, it should be in an optimistic way. The only concern I have OpCat with is that to be able to do covenants with OpCat, you need to use this thing called Schnorr trick. And I think it's not the cleanest solution. So I think there should be a covenant opcode and also OpCat. So we get both of like good worlds. Like, we can do covenants easily. We can do ZK verification much cheaper than BitVM. And then we can build optimistic rollups, good bridges. Like, that doesn't require a committee to sign a lot of transactions. It's just a covenant working in a optimistic but really a lot more secure way.
So this is interesting. Maybe this is the better question. If not OpCat, which covenant would you prefer, Ekrem? Which covenant would you like to see outside of OpCat?
TXH, I would say, because
not OpCTV.
OpCTV doesn't help a lot in terms of bridges. OpCTV is also good. I heard that, like, I haven't deep dived into it, but after OpCTV, we can also add OpTXH in a easier way. So I think this can be the road. Like, we go with CTV, TXH, and then OpCat.
You
so
think
that,
OpCat should be last? We need CTV, then we need
I would prefer all of them at the same time.
All of them at the same time.
But it's really hard to change Bitcoin this fast. So I think like the road will be like, everyone will see the demand with BitVM. Then we'll like add covenants. Everyone will see how good it is. Then okay, like, let's activate OpCat and see what it does, and then it improves the rollups a lot. And then like we can build theoretically like trustless rollups with OpCat. They're not that much feasible because this ZK verifier is still a lot bigger, still like 4 megabytes. But we can do much secure bridges with all of these covenants and OpCat.
Honestly, this is an aha moment for me personally. Alexei, I have to credit you for this idea that BitVM may just be like a giant marketing test net for OpCat, and that, this is all just sort of for proof of concept maybe until we
I don't
get
think that's
OpCat.
what he meant.
Do you agree
I see the shock in my
I
face.
like that narrative, but I don't think that's what he meant.
In a
If I'm
moment, I
being
promise.
honest.
But do you think that we need this sort of BitVM stage in order to prove to the world that these, bridges into programmable execution layers in particular have demand? Thoughts, anyone? Popcorn style.
I think so. I mean, oh yeah, go ahead, Udi.
Thanks. In general, I very much agree with any kind of statement where it says, like, let's first prove that people want this before we go and like try to like storm the gates. Yeah, in general, absolutely yes. I think though that we do have some data, right? Like I think that WBTC has been very popular on Ethereum. CBBTC is gaining a lot of popularity on Base and Solana. I don't know if the distinction of you know a lot of trust to a medium level of trust is what's gonna prove like a big difference there. But like maybe. Um, there's some level of semantics there. In my personal opinion, the best thing that happened in the last 2 years in Bitcoin has been that there's now way more teams that are building way more stuff with way more approaches. I don't think any one of us can guess like what is the correct order of things, or what is the most important thing is that most people try as many approaches as possible. And the reason that I am obsessed about Opcat so much is because I know it opens the gates for people to experiment even more. To Ekrem's point, Opcat is truly the shittiest opcode of all of the proposals. Like it is hacky, ugly. It's a pain in the ass. We've spent months building developer tools that we use internally in order to use Opcat in the first place, because using it like without any help is insanity. It really sucks in many ways. The nice thing about it is that it once you learn how to use it, it gives you a flexibility. It allows you to experiment with whatever you want, sometimes in a very inefficient way. And that can give us enough data to later say, okay, here are the things that people are actually building with Opcat. We made some guesses now, but who knows? Here are the things that they actually use Opcat for. And now we can go and implement opcodes that are much better, that make the same types of usage more efficient and more clean. TX Hash is a great example I think it is a better opcode than Opcat in every way. I would love it if it happens instead of Opcat. The reason that I think Opcat is kind of like better suited is really just a political, social reason. Technically, it is a mess. But socially and politically, people just, one, because it's called Cat, two, because it wasn't Bitcoin in the first release, three, because developers had like a 10-year period where they researched it, looked into it, learned how it works, fixed some issues. So it's just kind of, it reached that stage where like everyone kind of knows what to expect. Where TX Hash maybe does not have that level of maturity, but I'm all for it. Like let's let's do it as far as I'm concerned. Anyways, my point is, I'm totally with Alexei on this. Like, yes, we need to experiment things. We need to show demand. We could argue if that had already happened or not. But whenever Opcat happens, some people think it will happen faster. Some people think it will happen later. I think whenever it does happen, we're gonna see an explosion of exactly that, of more people trying to prove new use cases, and they basically will not have to ask for permission to do that anymore, which I think is really exciting.
Ayush, I want to go make sure that you have an opportunity to introduce yourself in LayerEdge. How are you guys using BitVM and/or plan to use Opcat?
Yeah, so as Alexei told that like if anyone is trying to use like BitVM, the transaction cost will be like relatively higher. So like one of the approaches that a majority of the industry is focusing on is like there are going to be like big dominant chains that will have like huge amount of user base, and then aggregate the net cost of individual transactions will be low. And this is like one approach to do. And like what we are believing in is like there can be like multiple different like hundreds and thousands of different small projects which are like either specialized or focused on one or the different part or different aspects of it. Like they can be game based chains and many different like small chains. Like we have seen the growth of ecosystem on Ethereum side. So what LayerEdge is trying to do, like initially we were also a layer 2, but then we realized that there is a bigger opportunity in this side. That's why we moved to a verification layer. And now what we are doing is like we support majorly the ZK chains, and we aggregate their proof into a single aggregated proof, and we like settle that aggregated proof on Bitcoin like using the BitVM. On the BitVM side, like our implementation is like, to be very honest, it's like pure vanilla implementation. Like it's the standard implementation like most of the guys are doing. And like the crux of our like part is like what we are doing is the aggregation part through which we can actually divide the cost among like different chains. So if the net aggregate cost of verifying a single transaction was say $100, So with 10 clients, we can do it like with $10 each. So this way, like the ecosystem is open to like multiple different chains, and they can now compete at lower user base and at like lower like transaction volumes. And like we are getting like really good response from the community also, because like recently we just launched our light node campaign for the guys who will be like verifying this whole aggregation process, and we got like more than 1 million users in less than a week, and like there was like pretty good traction. So like we were pretty happy with the approach that we are going. So our aim is like we want to be like a middleware where anyone who wants to build a chain on like a Bitcoin, they can directly connect to us. We'll take care of all the settlement aggregation and the native verification on the BitVM side, and they can relax on the tech side and focus on like what they are good at. Like if they're app based chain or game based chain, they can focus on their game, work on the specific use case, and we handle like all the heavy load of all the like aggregation, settlement, and making sure that everything works well on the security aspect.
Would it be fair to say, just so I understand, that you're sort of taking care of the bridging piece of things and letting people sort of modularly plug a ZKP BitVM bridge into other execution environments? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so like there are like two different parts. So one is like the like different chains have a different state change mechanism. So we are verifying that for the ZK based chain, and also like in future like we are focusing on the bridging aspect also. So as the Bitcoin implementation is not that apt right now, so initially we are much more focusing on the state verification, and once the state verification is complete, we'll be focusing on the bridging side.
I'm interested in this general idea of sort of being able to kind of modularly plug these bridges into other execution environments. So perhaps we'll circle back on that, but thank you so much for this introduction. So really quickly, because I know this is a hot topic, Udi, I'm going to circle back to you on, you mentioned the politics, right? You chose OpCat for political reasons. How's the political campaign going? Challenges, pros, cons? How has it been, kind of actually trying to get this BIP through the system?
Yeah, so when we started kind of publicly talking about OpCat exactly 1 year ago, really, I would say nobody took it seriously. I think I would say people saw it as a joke, kind of. I don't think anyone seriously considered that OpCat would be the next soft fork on Bitcoin. There were a few, at the time, Robin Linus was one of the only Bitcoin developers who were very much pro OpCat, and maybe one or two others, but really for most people they didn't really consider it as a serious option. I would say that completely flipped to the point that I think both in the developer community, the kind of entrepreneurial community too, in the mining community, I would say that OpCat probably has the most, visibility at this point, probably is kind of even in the developer community, there's recently been this kind of, we can argue about how accurate and how accurately it reflects reality, but there's this wiki page where a bunch of Bitcoin developers have been kind of stating their opinions on which proposal they prefer for the next soft fork for Bitcoin. OpCat is leading that among kind of Bitcoin developers who chose to take an opinion. So I think we've came pretty far. That said, the one of the most difficult parts of this kind of political process is that there isn't a clear process, right? Like, how do you get a soft fork through? Ask anyone you want, they'll all tell you basically the same thing. Well, the knowledgeable people will tell you the same thing, which is, I don't know, right? And we can look at the way that soft forks happened in the past and try to replicate that. But the truth is that the process for activating basically each one of the soft forks in Bitcoin's 15-year history, the process has always been different from the time before. And we very strongly believe that this time is going to be different too. And it's kind of this process of discovery where you're like, you kind of just try to push through and you hit all kinds of obstacles and you try to find a way around them, and eventually we'll find out like a new process which sadly will probably also not be relevant for the next time we want to do it. So it's like it's this very difficult kind of process of a lot of politics, a lot of politics is mostly what it is. But politics is sometimes easy when you know who's making the decisions, and the difficult and beautiful thing about Bitcoin is there isn't a person or a group that is calling the shots. So reaching consensus in that way is challenging, and I think that's why a lot of people are kind of, well, it's hard to see the light in the end of the tunnel, and it's hard to kind of make concentrated bets on when Opcat will be live or other soft forks. So I think that's where the challenge comes from. I also think that going through this process in the past for previous soft forks, I actually do have a lot of confidence that it'll happen, and that's why just because of the direction that things are moving, what we see, even though I can't paint the picture of what the next few weeks and months are going to look like, I can take a look at every at the last 12 months, and I can tell you that there's been progress literally every month. So the trend, I think, is very positive, and that's why we're very, very bullish on this. But it is
You've been
frustrating, I
very
think, that you
confident.
can't paint a picture for like how this is going to happen.
You've been very confident on Twitter. You've expressed a lot of confidence on Twitter that this is going to happen sooner rather than later. Is there a specific reason why you're confident about the timeline? Do you have a prediction on when something like this will actually be implemented?
Yeah, the reason that we've been so bullish on the timeline is just because things have happened much faster than we expected so far. So, and that is the only way I know to measure these things, right? So I'm just looking at, okay, we've got a bunch of people showing support. We've got all types of projects, all types of companies, all basically saying, yeah, we need Opcat. When we started this, we didn't expect StarkWare to basically shift the entire strategy for the entire project to be around Opcat. Didn't expect that. We didn't expect that a bunch of Lightning projects are going to be like, yeah, you know what, this is actually the best things for Lightning. We didn't expect that Blockstream is going to be so supportive of it. A lot of things that we didn't think were going to happen, and they did, and they happened way faster than we thought. So, I'm just saying, okay, if we keep this in the same pace, this is probably going somewhere.
Speaking of timelines, I want to turn the conversation to both Ekrem and Alexei. What will the transition be like for those folks who are building with BitVM, who presumably are going to be moving to implement Opcat? Is that something that's going to take a lot of time? Is that something that's going to be a big lift for the companies who are currently building bridges with BitVM? Or is that, something that can happen relatively smoothly?
I mean, or Ekrem, do you want to go first?
You can go first.
I think the good and bad thing about Bitcoin upgrades is like you will know within 6 months before it actually goes to mainnet that this is happening. Like there is no, oh, tomorrow we have Opcat, what are we gonna do? Oh my god. And like as startups working in this field, it's like our job like to be up to speed in this, and like we'll know that it's happening. We're not like a massive exchange like Coinbase or Binance, which like took ages to even like a year even afterward, like Taproot, to start supporting these things, and only because there was demand. Okay, fair enough. For them, it's like one of many things they care about. For us, it's like the thing. So I don't really see that as a major challenge. Like if it happens, cool, we'll be there, we'll be on top of it. And I think, I mean, Ekrem, I would be surprised if you guys say like, oh, maybe we'll wait a year to see if it works. Maybe to add to the timing part, and I had some interesting debates with also like Eric around this, and he did kind of convince me that timing is really important. And this isn't debated enough. Like, yes, I'm a proponent of we should ship BitVM and prove that there's demand and the people really care about these things, because that really, I think, will help us get the majority of the Bitcoin community on the side of making an upgrade, and sure, like there's really a clear reason, because I think a lot of people were burned by, okay, well, let's make an upgrade to fix Lightning, and then suddenly had ordinals and BitVM now, so it kind of it backfired in a good way. But But with institutionalization of Bitcoin, and we see in the market is Bitcoin's detaching from everything else. I think this is a different kind of cycle potentially, and the behavior of Bitcoin and its users is going to change as it's getting more distribution, more institutionalization. And I honestly do agree here with, I'm putting these words in Udi's mouth, given that Eric said them, so I assume they're somewhat aligned, but I'm just guessing. That there is like a tick, that the clock is ticking. Like, I think we have this year to really make a lot of progress and lock in what's happening next. Otherwise, it's just going to get more difficult. So I do think that the debates that are happening, even if they're sometimes controversial, they're definitely necessary.
In a second, I'm going to kind of wrap us up by talking about some of the security related concerns or just broad concerns from the community about implementing this. I know you mentioned sort of the uncertainty of what could people use this for being kind of the primary concern that folks are talking about. So we'll circle back to that in a moment. But quickly before we do that, Ekrem, I just want to say, are you guys sort of preparing for an OpCat future, or how are you thinking about this in terms of your BitVM versus OpCat building strategy?
So right now, we are not preparing for OpCat, but as Alexei said, switching from BitVM-based bridge to OpCat-based bridge would be very simple, and it can be done in 6 months. Because like BitVM-based bridge is much more, I believe BitVM-based bridges are much more complex than OpCat-based bridges. So, and like also OpCat-based bridges are more secure than BitVM-based bridges. So we'll like obviously switch to more secure one. I feel like it's our mission to use what's the most secure one, like if it's possible, feasible. So I believe it can be done in 6 months. I mean, if OpCat doesn't come, but some Covenant soft forks come, we'll also using them as well, because signing committee is not always good for security. So yeah, that's it from me.
So it sounds like, even though timing is a little bit of a mystery, it sounds like everyone's on the same page. No one is expecting this to happen in the next 6 months, is what I'm hearing. Really quickly before we wrap up, I do want to get into some of the concerns around OpCat. I would be remiss not to kind of get people's opinions about them, although it sounds like everyone on this panel is kind of on the same page. Udi, how do you respond to sort of the criticism that, like Taproot, which led to all these unintended consequences, like, greater data availability, ordinals, et cetera. How do you respond to the criticism that, OpCat, we should be cautious and conservative about OpCat because we don't know how it will be used and it could end up, introducing attack vectors that we're not aware of?
I know a lot of people that hold and use Bitcoin, like a lot, over the last 10 years that I've been involved in Bitcoin, I've been making a lot of friends and making a lot of enemies. And I know a lot of people who use Bitcoin. And I talk to them very frequently. And I don't know anyone, not a single one, whose usage of Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin has been somehow hurt by Taproot. I don't know a single person who is somehow positioned more poorly now because Taproot happened. Specifically, if we want to talk about ordinals, I don't know anyone who was hurt by the existence of ordinals. I think miners have been very happy about it, at least for a significant chunk of time. Some people have been playing around with ordinals a lot, and they seem happy too. And a lot of Bitcoin holders do not care about ordinals at all. They don't do anything with their existence, means nothing to them, and they don't care. If at all, Bitcoin has went up since ordinals were introduced. Bitcoin is now worth 5 times more than it was when ordinals were introduced. Is that because of ordinals? I would imagine probably not, but it definitely did not hurt anyone. Okay, there is a small group of people that I affectionately refer to as laser-eyed maxis, who do not care as much about the price of Bitcoin or the adoption of Bitcoin. In fact, they tend to say that they think Bitcoin should not be adopted. They tend to say that they think ETFs are bad, that institutional adoption is bad, that new people should not use Bitcoin because they don't get it as well as they do. They care a lot about views to their podcasts and so on, and that's okay. And I would agree that they were hurt by ordinals because the views that they were getting for their podcast did take a big sharp dip after ordinals started. I think their kind of worldview has taken a very, very big hit in the last 24 months. So I understand why they're upset, and I understand if they feel the same way about Cat. Um, People who care about Bitcoin's price performance, people who care about Bitcoin's stability, Bitcoin's decentralization, Bitcoin's security, I don't see any reason why they would be upset about Cat. People who care about people knowing that they are pure Bitcoiners who are maximalists, they hate other chains, they hate other tokens, people who care about that, I can see why they might be upset. But people who want Bitcoin to go up and want adoption to go up and want developers to build on Bitcoin and want the security of Bitcoin to improve, I think they should love Opcat, and it looks like they do. Some people just don't care about it, which is also a very reasonable position. But I don't actually know a lot of people who are very concerned about what will happen once Cat is live. I think that's quite literally concern trolling.
Does anyone want to add to that before we wrap up? Is there any devil's advocate play? And I know that this panel is, pretty much all of the mind that Opcat is good and building on Bitcoin is good and, expanding use cases for Bitcoin is good. That is not necessarily like a global perspective, but certainly perspective of most on this stage. Does anyone else want to take the devil's advocate here on potential risks associated with Opcat to broader Bitcoin before we sign off?
I mean, okay, I'll take one for the team, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had I think this panel was very refreshing in the sense that I think it was a very transparent discussion about pros and cons of Opcat, and Udi highlighted. Look, I mean, it is definitely not the nicest opcode. It is a hack. It is not ideal in its design, and it's hard to use. And I mean, yes, we can bring up the argument that with things like Opcat, you definitely open up more attack surfaces, right? It is the case, right? Just because, computationally speaking, you can do more things, it means you can. It's impossible to map out all possible attack vectors. Now, whether this is a reason not to activate something is up for debate. That's why this is such a hot debate at the end of the day, because on one hand, if you following logic, okay, if I can't really find anything easily, but someone might, is that a reason to not do it? On the other hand, it's Bitcoin. This is the one thing, if it goes wrong, we'll go home, right? So I can see why there's resistance. And to bring one argument here, why, yes, it is Bitcoin, it's been around for so long, and the kind of risks were fixed, but even when the issues, the reason why Satoshi moved it are no longer present. But then, I mean, ETH, not so long ago, after being around for a long time, had a bug with gas estimations where you could take out a lot of the nodes. In fact, one of my colleagues from PG Times actually discovered it, and it had to get patched in an upcoming fork. And that happened to Ethereum much, much later in its existence. And it's not as old as Bitcoin, but these things can pop up. And then the question that arises here, let's say nothing happens for 5 to 10 years, and then someone discovers something. Can we patch Bitcoin fast enough to fix a potential bug like this? So that is, I think, what it burns down to, in my view. And there's no easy answer of, is that a risk we should accept or not? I'm not sure. I think we definitely have to move. And my personal take is probably TX hash is a lower risk, but it is not as powerful. And that is essentially the trade-off. And I ultimately and also we at Bob haven't made a final position yet, because we're actually digging quite deep through the different options. But the position that we definitely present is we need a fork ultimately. Bitcoin will have to upgrade and innovate. Otherwise, it will never fulfill this mission of, or the ideal flippening of, there's more BTC on L2s and in DeFi than on ETFs.
That makes sense. I don't remember if it was the BitVM panel earlier today, but one thing that I might add that was sort of an aha moment for me today was the risks associated with not having trustless bridging in the first place, right? And all of the Bitcoin that is lost on account of bad bridging, for lack of a better word, custodial bridging. So yeah, I hope that everyone goes home and thinks about that as well when they're thinking about Opcat. This was an awesome panel. Udi, you always bring it. Thank you, Ekrem, Alexei, and Ayush. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for your insight and another amazing panel.